Okay. This week on It's Your Time You're Wasting, we have Sam Freedman talking about exams.
And we've got Toby Young talking about the Free Speech Union and the case of the Eton teacher again. What's the update on the case of Mr. Noland?
We're also going to be talking about COVID, what's happening, do schools need to close early, and the kerfuffle about mass testing in the southeast.
And also we will have a look at a little tweet that was put out this week on INSET days and what they should be for, if anything at all. And we've got a draw as well, a prize draw, haven't we?
As per, yes, we have. Right.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues. Lose the blues, lose the blues. You can walk the streets through the lonely night.
Right, we're back. Martin, how's your week been?
Not great, not a great week. I also had to have a COVID test this week, but luckily it's negative.
Yeah, well, that is lucky. I have to say it because you've already had it once. What would you be doing?
I didn't have the test last time, though. You see, I had the disease without the test. Now I've got the test without the disease.
That's the right way round. And I had to take family members for COVID tests last week, which also fortunately negative. The drive-through system, though, very efficient. Did you drive through?
Yeah, and we got this is the second time we've done this as a family day out. And we go to Charlton Athletic Football Ground, funnily enough, and it's a lovely place to go to have a COVID test, and we all park our cars there and take out a picnic.
Yes, very nice. So I think when all this is over finally, those people that haven't been for drive-through COVID tests, I think they'll have missed something, maybe.
Absolutely. I mean, they could actually put it together with drive-in movies, couldn't they?
That would be perfect. Very short movies, but maybe.
Well, perhaps then it could be whilst you wait for your result, if they're the quicker results, the half-hour to
24-hour movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when the vaccine's out, or when the vaccine's available for the likes of you and me, Martin, will you be taking it?
Of course I will. Yes, right. I trust the science.
Perfect. Good to hear. No, I've had some quite interesting conversations this week where people have asked me that, and I've said exactly as you said. Yes, of course I will, and they've said, "Oh, I'm not sure if I will." Which
yeah.
You never really know quite what to say in response to that.
Well, I think it's a sensible response. People are worried about these things, and it's the argument should be one of reassurance rather than abuse. You idiot. That's not going to help. I think it needs to be, here are the facts, lay them out.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that maybe the argument is, if you've got a bill of clean health and you've got your COVID vaccine certificate, then you don't have to wear masks, maybe, and you can, be reassured loved ones that you're not putting them at risk. It all sounds win-win to me.
Will there be a black market in COVID test results?
I don't think so. Why would there be?
Well, you can forge passports. Why can't
you mean test results, or do you mean vaccine?
No, the vaccines, the cards, the passports, the COVID passports.
What, for anti-vaxxers who want to say that they've taken the vaccine?
Yeah,
Oh, that's an interesting one. Who knows?
I live in South East London. We think about these things.
You need to. So we've got we've only got 2 interviews this week, which is probably a good thing, because viewers will get more of the Dido Robinson banter. But for better or worse. But our first interview is Sam Freedman, and Sam, for those that don't know him, was an ex-government advisor, also worked at Teach First, and currently works for a charity which I forgot. Policy First, something like that. No, I've got it wrong. I feel really embarrassed now. I have to look it up. But doing work particularly in sub-Saharan Africa on education. And we've split his interview into various bits. But this week we've got him talking about exams. So what's the right decision right now, and what's the right way to do exams in the future? So let's hear from Sam first. Sam, can I ask you, before I let you go, the big pressing concern at the moment is on whether or not exams are going to go ahead in England. So decisions have been made in Scotland, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, and in England, government have committed to exams going ahead. There's various speculation about what form they will go ahead in. But also, I think if we've learned anything over the last few months, it's that we can't really trust, perhaps, the government to, if they've committed to a decision, we can't trust that they won't completely U-turn on it later. So, what can you sort of frame the problem for us in terms of, what are the alternatives? What are some of the best things that are on offer, and is there any hope for school students this year who are waiting to find out what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a horrible situation. There's no good, as there wasn't this summer, there's no good answer here. You've got a situation where the current sort of year groups that are going to be taking exams in the summer have not only lost a large chunk of their education, but have lost it differentially.
Yeah.
So, and region, different in different kind of regions, different in different school. In every school, some kids have had to be off for large chunks of time. Others have since lockdown ended, have been able to be in school the whole time. So you've got lost learning and differential lost learning. So when you get to the summer and you need to somehow triage young people into their next destination, whether it's kind of sixth forms, further education colleges at 16, or university apprenticeships and other kinds of courses at 18, you have to use something to make that decision. You can use a kind of slightly toned down version of the exams. You can use teacher assessment of some kind, moderated to different levels, or you could use you could simply use the destinations they could make decisions about who they take. These are really your options, but none of them are good, because all of them will be affected by differential learning loss, and the teacher assessment has the added flaw of creating kind of massive disparity between different schools, because teachers, through no fault of their own, simply are unable to, at the individual level, create a system that is equal in every school, because they don't know how other teachers are behaving in their school.
Right.
So I think when people criticize teacher assessment, it's often seen as you don't trust teachers. I trust teachers, and they make good judgments about their own students. I just don't think those judgments will be the same in every classroom, in every school. They'll be using their own slightly different way of making those decisions. It's not like I think they're cheating. I just don't think it's possible for a 500,000 people to simultaneously come up with results that fit a fair system. So I think the argument for keeping exams is that, yes, it's going to be more unfair than ever this year, but it's still better than any other alternative, in that at least you will get a fair assessment of where everybody is, and you will those who do achieve will get proper certification. Whereas if you go for a kind of teacher assessment model, you just add even more complexity and confusion into the system, and and people don't leave with certification either. But for me, the crucial aspect of it is the destination, because that's what really matters. That's what we saw this summer. It's where you're going. Like, do you get into the university of your choice? Do you get onto the apprenticeship of your choice? So I would be working with the universities, with the apprenticeship providers, with the FE colleges and sixth forms, to make sure you had as many places available as possible, so that you could be maximally generous in destinations to try and deal with the unfairness that's been created by learning loss. It's still going to be unfair on some young people. There's just no way of avoiding it, I don't think.
Absolutely. So, in terms of focus then on destinations, there's an argument where if schools and whether sixth forms are focused on these exams, and the main use of these exams is to determine where children go next, would it be more rational, more sensible for universities, apprenticeships, apprenticeship providers to actually do that sorting process themselves? Is this a good use of education anyway, despite, even if we weren't talking about the unfairness caused by differential learning loss?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things this summer's crisis really showed up was how ridiculous our university access system actually is compared to other countries who obviously had COVID but didn't have this level of crisis over this process of university access. The fact that in any year, regardless of COVID, 1 mark's difference can be the difference between you going to what's considered to be one of the most elite universities or not is a bit daft. And the sheer level of hierarchy within our university structure lends itself towards that. There's an obsession with Oxford and Cambridge, which have sort of 6,000 places a year between them, which that's always going to be very limited. Then you've got kind of an obsession with the Russell Group and so on as you work your way down. I think it does. Once this is all over, I think it opens up some broader questions around why we feel the need to select so tightly at university. If you look at a country like Canada, they don't even really do an equivalent to A levels. But they don't need to, because anyone who wants to go to university kind of does, and they're all pretty much considered to be of similar quality. So there's not this kind of desperate need to get that grade higher to get into the very top place, so that you then get access to the best jobs and so on. So I think it does kind of open up some much broader questions about systematic fairness. That even in a good year when everything's run smoothly, there's a lot of inaccuracy in especially on the humanities side in A-level marking.
Yes.
So when you're saying these tiny differences make such huge difference to people's lives, and yet you've got inaccuracy built into the system, and of course the unfairness of the school system, where rich parents can tutor their kids or send them to private schools. I think we need to look at how selective our tertiary system is and whether it needs to be that selective.
So a lot of people have taken the opportunity now to call for a rethink on the whole way we do summative assessment in schools and colleges. Is it time to rethink the system? Are there any better alternatives to exams that are out there that other places in the world are using and we're just not seeing?
I think most countries have some kind of examination between junior and upper secondary. That could be anywhere between 14 and 16, depending on the country. We are unusual in how important those exams are in our system, partly because we use them to judge the schools to a very tight regulatory process. And Ofsted use them heavily, obviously. So schools feel very compelled to put a lot of energy into them. But most countries do something at that age, and I think it's reasonable to do some kind of examination at that age, because a lot of children, when they go into upper secondary, will not be doing academic subjects. Only 40% of kids do A levels. So for the 60% of young people who are going to do a vocational course after 16, I think it's really important they've got some kind of academic certification. The degree of importance we put on it in our system and the focus we put on it and how it drives the curriculum all the way down to 11, I think you can look again at that. I think that's a lot of that's in how we use the results, not necessarily in having exams themselves.
Okay, so that's an interesting point, Sam. So you say 40% of children go on to do A levels, and those that do other courses need some kind of academic certification. But many of them aren't going to be, or the only academic certification they're going to be getting is that they didn't do very well?
Well, I'm not sure that's necessarily true. A lot of people who go on to do BTECs and apprenticeships will have done quite well at GCSE, and will certainly have got C grades, which is important as a marker for employers.
Yeah.
So I do think it really matters that you have some kind of academic certification at that age, because I think if you don't, you will have you end up having to do it in the vocational course essentially.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think were wrong with the structure of diplomas, which are not. I don't completely disagree with the idea of diplomas in principle, but one of the structural problems was that these vocational courses were actually really pseudo-academic because you needed to certify the academic quality through them. So you end up muddling the two things together. So I would rather we certificated academic at 16, and then for those who weren't going to carry on in an academic path, they were able to do proper vocational courses that led to employment after that.
Yeah, but I think I'm not sure of the statistic off the top of my head. You might know this better than me, but isn't it around 40% of the cohort don't get a grade 4, and therefore we're certificating that percentage, whatever it is, have not met a standard, and it's.
Yeah. I think that might be the number for who don't get either English or maths.
Right. Okay.
I think more get one or the other.
Okay. I think that's right.
But I think even if what you get is a 3, or it's still better than not having anything to take from an employer. So I think I do think it matters. But I'm very open to discussing like how those exams work, how we use the data, like how many subjects you do them in. I think I'm not sort of saying GCSEs are the perfect system. I don't think they are, but I think it's a bit naive to say, oh, we don't need exams at 16 because people are still in education till 18. They are, but they're doing very different types of education.
Would it be practical? I mean, so in your view, your knowledge of the system, do you think it'd be practical to have something along the lines of a driving test model where you can retake as often as need be until you pass? Obviously, with driving tests, we assume that pretty much everybody is going to be able to pass eventually, and then they're certified to be roadworthy. Is there scope for a similar sort of model in terms of basic literacy and numeracy in schools, do you think, or is that?
You kind of have that in the sense that if you don't get the 4, you're supposed to redo it in the 6th form. I mean, there isn't a high success rate.
No.
But that does make me wonder whether an even more driving test kind of process would be feasible, in the sense that if we consider level 4 to be what the right standard for literacy and numeracy for adult life, then there may just be a large group of people at the moment who are not getting the teaching and support required to get them over that line. So I'd be more inclined to think about what do we need to be doing further back in the system to make sure that everyone does get a 4. My view has always been that it should be possible for anyone who doesn't have serious learning difficulties to get a 4. That I've not seen any kind of data or cognitive kind of analysis that suggests that isn't possible, and there are fully comprehensive schools that get nearly every child to a 4. So I believe that must be possible at a national level, if we get the education system right.
So the large percentage of children who don't get 4s in maths and English, is that an indictment of the system then?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's an indictment of the system. I don't think it's easy to do what I'm talking about. I just think it's possible, and that should be our aim as a system. And that does mean, by the way, some tweaks to the way GCSEs are I think it needs to be easier to show improvement year on year in the system through GCSEs. Comparable outcomes makes it very difficult for there to be a higher percentage of 4s year on year.
Yeah.
We're talking normal world, not the moment where the whole thing is in a mess. So I acknowledge that you need to move to a slightly more kind of criterion reference model if you're going to do what I'm talking about. But I do think that we should be aiming for a system where 95% of kids get what we consider to be an adequate level of literacy and numeracy by the time they leave the first stage of secondary school.
Yeah, and we're nowhere near that, are we?
And we're nowhere near that at the moment, but some schools do it, right? So it is possible. You've got completely comprehensive schools with a very wide ability range on entry that are getting 95% plus 4s.
Yeah, absolutely, and they are an inspiration, and there are various schools that I know of and I've worked with, and I just think what they're doing is incredible. But with the current system, it wouldn't be true to say that if everybody did what they're doing, that we could then get 95% of people getting a level 4, because the grade boundaries would just rise.
I mean, in theory, if the exam boards can show a genuine improvement in quality, they can award more 4s than the previous years. But it's pretty hard to do that at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying I think you'd need to loosen that up as well if you were going to set that ambition. And yet right now, if a politician said we want 95% of kids to reach this benchmark, a lot of teachers would rightly say, but the system works completely against that ambition because of comparable outcomes. So I think you'd need to look at that again. But I think that would be the right ambition. I don't see how we can continue to think it's acceptable that whether it's 30 or 40% of kids are failing at that age. So you would need to tweak the system, but I think you'd also need to do a lot of things differently educationally.
Right. So don't get rid of exams, but exam reform probably necessary if we're serious about getting what we say we want.
And be really clear about your objectives, right? I mean, this is one of the problems with exams. They're trying to achieve so many different things. We're using them to regulate the school. We're using them to certificate individuals for their employment, but also using them as a sorting mechanism for where they go to next. I think we need to be really clear about what we're trying to achieve with a possibly simpler, cut down set of exams, which for me is certification is the primary goal.
So would you be arguing then that using them to hold schools to account distorts the system?
Yeah, it does. But again, I mean, I think there's ways of using data to hold schools to account that would be less distorting. It's just that we have such a punitive model of accountability now, and schools are terrified of getting bad results for 1 year that it is distorting. I think there's a balance to be found where you have an accountability system that is initially focused on support and improvement and only goes to punitive after a lot of other options have been tried, which would still be a little bit distorting because accountability just is distorting. There's no way around it, but would be much less distorting than what we have at the moment. Sam,
thank you so much for wasting so much of your time talking to me this morning. It's been a real pleasure.
No worries.
I was great. Really enjoyed it.
Good to speak to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, a lot in that, Martin.
Very good interview. Enjoyed that a lot. I like the idea of. I think you mentioned it being roadworthy. I don't know if pupils had to be roadworthy or something like that, but the driving test model is something I particularly like, because music exams are another way of talking about it, drama, lambda exams, things like that. Taking a test when you're ready, but also saying, well, this is a basic test. I think there should be a test that is taken on basic numeracy and or literacy or whatever, an English and maths kind of test is taken perhaps between the ages of 11 and 14 by every student, and all must pass. And if you want to judge schools on something, it could be a test that all must pass, not a test that's put out there that 40% or so have got to fail.
Yes, and so that was quite sort of interesting to sort of think about the idea that we could tweak the system by loosening up those comparable outcomes, and that if we, the school improvement agenda used to be, how do you get every student to get a C grade, and currently it's that's moribund, because we're now sort of acknowledging that we've got this baked in idea. Okay, so only 60% or so are going to get over the hurdle. And what do we do with the ones that don't? Do we make them retake it at college? And what ones that don't even get a 3? That's it. We just write those off. We don't even expect them to retake it. We might, and then at that point we might get that cohort to do functional skills qualifications.
Yeah.
Which, and I'm no great advocate of functional skills as they currently are, but maybe, thinking more carefully about what they look like and what they're supposed to do and their relative importance might be better.
Yeah, and it's interesting whether poetry appreciation is one of the key skills for an employer, or is one of the things about life quality that we would like people to have, and whether the judging on one is the same as judging on the other, and whether those things should all be tied together into one big exam is arguable.
Yes, it's a tricky one, because as soon as you get into, the purpose of examinations are to communicate information to employers, then I think that quite rightly many people think, well, why should the purpose of schools be to make employers' lives easier? If employers want to know these things, maybe they can sort out their own tests. So I do have a bit of a problem with doing things for the sake and the ease of destinations other than school. So again, if universities need to know information about how to select, is it the job of schools to provide that information to universities? And so I thought that was really interesting, again, what Sam was saying about that this year in particular, maybe education providers could be, as he put it, maximally generous, which I thought was a nice phrase. But I didn't realize the extent until I was talking to Sam about it, the fact that we're a bit of an outlier here in the UK with our university admissions, and as he talked about, that in Canada doesn't really matter. You apply, and pretty much if you've applied, you go. And
something that Laura McInerney has argued for some time as well, the idea of a comprehensive university system, that if it should be open to all to go to whichever course they might be interested in. But of course, we have such snobbery built into our system. There are, in England, 2 universities, and then a few others which are slightly lesser, and then some others which are a bit more lesser, and then some which are just polytechnics, really.
We do have that, of course. I don't think that, compared to the US system, I don't think the snobbery is any less or more. But I think, and I've certainly heard Laura, and let's invite Laura onto the program to talk about this, but I've also heard her say that when you let universities regulate their own examination systems, then that creates more disparity and unfairness and inequity. And that in her view, and I'm talking for her here, is that it's better to have this national examination where there's more of a level playing field. But anyway, since that interview was aired, we've had further feedback from the government, and we know now, or the government have recommitted in England to sitting exams, but there's going to be students will be able to take some form of notes in with them. We're not quite sure what. We know that, for instance, in an English literature exam, you won't be able to take the text that you studied in there, but maybe in a physics exam you'll be able to take in pages of formulas, perhaps, that kind of thing. And there's various other sessions.
You can take in the answers. You can take in the answers.
Well, I think it's a delicate tightrope, isn't it? And obviously on the other side of the border in Scotland, they've now also cancelled the hires, so there'll be no examinations at all in Scotland, and so we've got this really different commitment over that border, over the wall, so to speak. And it looks like, it feels now more certain that some form of examinations will be going ahead, at least in England this year. And but we're still waiting for the details on that.
Yeah, it's in January. I think they're being released, the details. But again, it'll be interesting to see if they're talking about areas that might be the main focus in the exam. This should be told to people at the beginning in September, because of course some people would have taught something, others would have taught something else. Therefore, already there's going to be baked in advantage for some people who happen to have been taught those things already.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? One of the so years ago, I used to teach a media studies course, and the exam topic was released a few months before the exam, and then you sort of you focused on that, and you knew what the question was, and you prepared it, and you took in the notes that you'd made, and that was part of the assessment process. And that's one way to approach things, which conceivably we might go with. The other point briefly we should touch on before we move on to our next segment is the point about differential learning loss. And people are saying, okay, so whatever we're choosing to do, it's still the case that in some parts of the country, in some schools, children have been absent from school for disproportionate periods of time. In other parts of the country, in other schools, business as usual has pretty much been the case. Somewhere like Cornwall, for instance, which have very, very low infection rates. And what do we do about that? And one proposal that I saw, which I thought was quite a nice idea, potentially, would be to award, student gets the grade, and then in brackets next to it, the number of days that they were absent from school due to COVID. And so that anyone looking then at the grade they were awarded would be able to go, oh, okay. So in light of that information, that provides me with a bit more context. I don't know.
You might get something like 8:44 or something like that.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
Sounds like a train time, actually, doesn't it?
It does a bit, doesn't it? But we do. I think we do need to do something to try to go some way to solving that problem of differential learning.
But haven't we got special dispensation forms that you fill in for each pupil?
Have we?
On that, you could put in the days of absence, and that could be taken into account in the marking.
All of these things are possible. Is that something that's I hadn't heard that was going ahead?
No, but I mean that was something that's done every year. That certainly used to be. You'd fill in a form that a child had been, perhaps someone had been off for an operation or
right.
Emotional trauma going through or something like that, and then you'd put that in, and that would be
some form of Igratat. Yeah, maybe.
I mean, to me, it sounds sensible and easy, but
it sounds like an awful lot of work if you're going to be doing that for like every student in your cohort.
You need to employ someone to fill all the forms in.
Or alternatively, we could maybe be a bit more sensible about this and go, well, all the schools in this area have had this problem, and therefore we won't make them fill in paperwork for every individual student. But yeah, something along those lines is probably a good idea, isn't it? So, Martin, what else are we talking about today? I mean, we're talking about the effects of COVID. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in the southeast.
Well, here we go. So 7 London boroughs, apparently, and parts of Essex and Kent, all secondary school students are going to be encouraged to take a test whether they have symptoms or not.
Right. And we've had various sort of media responses from this. I mean, Jeff Barton at ASCL has a particular view, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think he's just saying, why not close the schools, basically. I mean, not close the schools in terms of sending pupils to them, close them down, but obviously keep lessons going via online facilities. But, that might give a break, but it won't give us the information about which kids have it and which kids don't, of course. So perhaps that is what is also important to know before Christmas, whether you're going to go and see Granny or whatever, that you perhaps have got COVID or whatever, or would you be over it by then? I don't know. How long does it take now? 10 days?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe both. Maybe we need both measures. But I've also seen people in the north of the country spitting mad and saying we've had, terrible problems up in various parts of the north of England. And why is this mass testing being focused on the southeast? Why is it bloody?
It started off mass testing started off in Liverpool, wasn't it?
That's
I mean,
true.
the whole of Liverpool were open to mass testing. It wasn't just secondary school students, so they could, as far as I'm aware, take the quick tests as well.
Mm. What's the particular problem? I mean, it looks like secondary school students in particular are really responsible, perhaps, for spreading the virus in these areas.
Well, I couldn't possibly comment on whether they're doing it kind
I'm
of
not
deliberately or
suggesting
anything like
it's
that, or through negligence or anything.
No,
But
no, no.
generally, the age group that's coming through, they're saying that there's quite a few secondary school age students, and it's growing faster in that age group than it is all others. And what follows on, of course, from a younger age group is that older age groups tend to follow on. Of course, they go home, and there it spreads.
And so one of the things that the Department for Education has suggested, in order, particularly I think, in order to sort of relieve the pressure on schools having to do track and trace, is that if we close schools on the 18th of December, then you won't have head teachers, senior leaders doing track and trace on Christmas Eve. And the suggestion has been, why not just have an INSET day on the 18th of December? But that's not met with universal approval, has it?
Well, what's the INSET day for, I suppose? I mean, if anything, if it was, say, go home staff, I think, or let's just try and wrap things up as best we can. But an INSET day, you have to show you're doing something on an INSET day, aren't you? You're meant to perhaps invite a consultant in or something.
A hard-working consultant, yes, of course. Well, this is part of the. I think lots of school leaders have been feeling quite affronted and saying this isn't just a duvet day. This isn't just that we're having a day off for staff. It's that these things take planning, and they're about teacher education and ongoing professional development, and just assuming that this can all be sorted out at the last minute is a little bit patronising.
Yeah. What is an INSET day anyway? There's an interesting tweet that came out a couple.
Well, just before we look at the tweet, one response, I should say, Greenshaw Learning Trust is running a national INSET day that any school in the country is welcome to take part in. And if you look at Greenshaw on the internet or on Twitter or something like that, you'll be able to find details of their national INSET day. So that's one idea if you do want to maybe think about closing on the 18th. But yeah, you were talking about a little bit of a Twitter kerfuffle about what INSET's actually for, that came from science teacher Adam Boxer, and I think you've clipped his tweet for us to have a look at, haven't you, Martin?
I hope so. It should be coming up any minute now.
There we are. So the even good INSET, even worthwhile INSET, is maybe not all that useful because it doesn't have that much impact on what teachers actually do in classrooms. It's too theoretical. What do you think? What do you make of that, Martin?
I think a one-off INSET day generally has very little impact anyway, no matter what you talk about. And I think what this has been going on for years, of course. What they ended up doing is tips and tricks, little gimmicks and things. You can try this in your classroom tomorrow. It became part of the whole, you'd go off on a course, have a nice dinner and all that, and come back with one or two ideas you could use tomorrow. It's a very expensive way of getting people to do gimmicky things in classrooms, but not necessarily deep change, deep thoughtful change about what your pedagogy, I'm going to use that word advisedly, or curriculum or pastoral work might be, and whether it needed change or not.
So some people are saying that so maybe the pendulum swung too far away from those gimmicky one-off. Let's put together little toolkits for teachers to play around with and experiment with in the classroom. Let's instead do some deep thinking about cognitive science or the philosophy that underpins a good curriculum, which is all very interesting and all very well, but what difference does it make to teachers?
Yeah, and the thing about deep thinking is it needs time. And the big problem with our system is 5 INSET days a year. 2 of those you want to do, generally just trying to keep your exam work going or whatever. You want to do in-house stuff as much as you can on these things for 2, 3, or 4 days. So you end up with one day where you invite a consultant in, they talk about all this stuff that perhaps involves big change, and teachers have no time to do big change because it takes real time, so they need to be off timetable more if anything is going to be done of any effect, really. And also you need the whole structure around that, the ecosystems that people, teacher centers used to be a good thing, I thought, though they were taken over by certain sets of advisors, perhaps, which again with one view, who are now probably all consultants, by the way, because it's kind of privatized, isn't it? The whole consultant system is the privatization of council advisors.
Yeah, the local authority advisory team
yeah.
were all made redundant in most parts of the country, weren't they?
Yeah. And they're now sort of earning money, charging great deals for INSET days. I think a teacher center where people could actually, form communities of inquiry and things like that. I think they're great, the good ones.
It comes back to perhaps structural problems with the way that we set things up in this country, where teachers have a lot more contact time in the UK than they do in most OECD countries, and maybe if we're interested about improving what goes on in classrooms and in schools, maybe we should ask teachers to teach less. But then if you're doing that, then you need more teachers, and where are they going to come from? Although I do think one of the effects, one of the potential silver linings of COVID is that for the first time in quite a number of years, we've got a full set of people recruited to take part in PGCE and the initial teacher training for the year ahead. So it's looking like a safe prospect.
When there's a recession, there's always jobs for teachers. I mean, it's a well-known correlation. I'd just like to go back to the idea of consultants, to give a helpful consultancy, if you like. That consultants aren't sort of consultants in the way perhaps experts brought in and sort of sharing their, in an INSET day it can be a different thing, which is the consultant as salesperson. They're going there to sell an idea, sell a book, sell a course, sell this stuff that they've got to sell more of, and that can be rather distasteful, perhaps.
Can be. Well, I suppose as in any sector, consultancy covers a wide range of sin, and I think obviously ethical people like you and me, Martin, would consider ourselves well above that, but I couldn't possibly comment on some of that stuff. But I'm sure it goes on for definite. And one of the commentators I saw we had on the show a couple of weeks ago, Barry Smith, saying that he said, I would never get somebody from outside the school to speak at the INSET day because they don't know the culture of the school. And there's something in that. Obviously, you and I have both been invited into a great many schools to talk to staff, and we've, often we're briefed and we have phone calls and discussions about the school's culture. But occasionally, I don't know if you've ever had this, Martin. Occasionally, I've had somebody phone me up and say, could you come and speak at our school? And I say, yes, what would you like me to talk about? And they go, just inspire us, which always strikes me as a little bit dangerous.
Do you have a problem with inspiration? Is that
terrible.
Part of your...
No, absolutely. Turgid stuff.
Part of your palate or whatever? No, I do remember when I was a teacher, which I did for quite a few years. I was one of those at the beginning who would sit at the back rather cynically, pen in mouth. Looking at the consultant at the front, thinking,
imagine it was your pipe, actually, Martin.
So it went back a long time. Those days, of course, we had quill pens.
All of that, and band printers. Anyway, look, enough of this. We need to hear a little bit from your interviewee this week, Martin, Toby Young, talking particularly about the latest that's going on with Noland Gate over at the Eton mess.
Yes, indeed. Let's roll Cine 2 or whatever it is. Good evening. Thank you, Toby, for turning up today and allowing us to waste a bit of your time. The Free Speech Union, they've been involved in an ongoing story that's been top of the I don't know, headlines for over a week now, and that's the case of the Eton teacher, Mr. Noland. Can you tell me what's been going on there? I think he got in touch with you, the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, to perhaps represent him a bit in some of the events that have happened.
Yeah, he's a member of the Free Speech Union, and he joined some time ago. He didn't just join because this particular event blew up. So what happened is that in September, he made a video lecture for a strand in the Eton curriculum called Perspectives, and it is intended for pupils aged 16 and above. And the idea of Perspectives is to introduce sixth form students to a range of big controversial issues and to encourage them to think through those issues themselves and come up with a kind of defensible position. They're not supposed to be themselves representing lots of different views. The way these video lectures are made as part of the course is that they take a particular point of view. They're quite polemical. Lots of people who've seen Will Noland's video lecture on YouTube have said this is a very one-sided view of this subject, but actually it's supposed to be a one-sided view. That's what the teachers are supposed to do in this particular curriculum strand. And in this particular video lecture, Mr. Noland takes issue with radical feminist orthodoxy. I think for the most part, the boys at Eton are taught that masculinity is quite suspect, if not entirely toxic. Organizations like the Good Lad Initiative come in to do training with the boys. Laura Bates of the Everyday Sexism Project. So quite a lot of the information the boys receive on masculinity, other gender issues, this whole kind of subject area is very one-sided. And so Mr. Nolan thought it would be useful for the boys to have another perspective. So his video lecture is a critique of radical feminist orthodoxy, quite a robust critique. When he initially uploaded this to the school intranet, so the boys could view it, a member of staff complained. We don't know what the gender of that member of staff is, but the complaint was that if female members of staff are being asked to discuss the contents of this video lecture with pupils, that will be a degrading and humiliating experience and will therefore constitute harassment and a form of discrimination which is unlawful according to the Equality Act 2010. When the headmaster received this complaint, I think there were then subsequent similar complaints put in, I think there was more than one, he sought legal advice. And I think the legal advice he received was that if a claim was brought against the school, a discrimination claim by a female member of staff along those lines, it might be successful in the employment tribunal, and therefore it was advisable if this was taken down from the school intranet. He then asked Mr. Nolan to take it down and said, "I'm sorry, you can't teach this. There's been a complaint." He complied with that request, and then he told the headmaster that he had also uploaded it to his personal YouTube channel. And so the headmaster asked him to take it down from his YouTube channel too. And this is where we kind of, I think, stray into a grey area. I think it's quite grey as to whether the Equality Act would have prescribed the particular lesson that Will Nolan devised being taught in the school. But I think it's even greyer as to whether it would prescribe him uploading this to his personal YouTube channel, given that it does say that he teaches at Eton on his YouTube channel. So there is a link between him and the school on the channel. And then Will asked the headmaster, I think he calls himself, why he wanted him to take it down from his personal YouTube channel. And the headmaster at that point was unable, at least according to Mr. Nolan, to give him a good reason. And I think that's because the headmaster had only sought legal advice at that stage about the lawfulness of teaching the lesson and not the lawfulness of including it on the YouTube channel. So he wasn't prepared to commit and say, you've got to take it down from YouTube because that's what the Equality Act dictates. So he didn't give Will a good reason, at least in Will's view. And so Will didn't take it down. The headmaster then said, if you don't take it down, I'm going to suspend you and investigate you, and that could lead to a disciplinary process which might lead to your dismissal for gross misconduct. Will still declined to take it down. He was suspended, investigated, put through a disciplinary process, and sacked for gross misconduct. And he appealed that decision. And the appeal was on Monday of this week. And they haven't yet said whether they're going to uphold his appeal or deny it. But they need to inform him within 7 days. So we will know, I think, by next Monday what Eton has decided to do. I think it was on Tuesday, actually, that the appeal was, as far as I feel.
There's quite a few issues there. One of which is, who owns a lesson? I mean, is it when it's recorded? I mean, this is the other thing about digital lessons, of course. Most of the time, this would have taken place behind a classroom door, and perhaps no one would have known more about it.
Yes.
But who owns the lesson? If it's done in school time, and bearing in mind that Eton is an institution that seems to go on for weeks, of course, it's 24/7, isn't it? Is it Eton's or is it the teachers?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. As I understand it, it's not commonplace for these lessons to be turned into videos so the boys can view them. I think that's just something that has coincided with COVID, because not all the boys are present at the school, and I don't think face-to-face lessons are routinely, or were at that stage anyway, routinely taking place. But as far as I know, the school hasn't made a copyright claim. It hasn't said, take down the video lecture from your personal YouTube channel because we own the copyright and you're in breach of that copyright. That isn't an argument they've made. The argument they've made is twofold. I think they've subsequently said, I think the headmaster sought additional legal advice from an equalities barrister, a barrister who specializes in equality law. And that barrister's advice was, yes, the YouTube putting this video lecture on the YouTube channel is also something that could expose the school to a claim in the employment tribunal by a female member of staff. So that's the main argument, I think, that's subsequently been made as to why he should take down the video. But I also think that there's another argument, which is that it's a breach. I think that they claim it's a breach of Eton's social media policy, whereby the staff can't do anything likely to bring the school into disrepute. Lots of companies have these kind of quite far-reaching social media policies, which gives them a pretext to police what people say outside the workplace. And it's something that the Free Speech Union has run up against several times in connection with our members. I mean, I think one thing that really concerns me about this case is that if Will's appeal isn't upheld, I think other schools will conclude that the Eton headmaster's interpretation of the Equality Act and what it prescribes being taught as part of the curriculum is legally sound, and will then worry themselves if they get a complaint from a member of a protected group claiming that teaching something or discussing something else that's been taught with the boys is prohibited by the Equality Act. And so if his appeal fails, I think that could have a very chilling effect on free speech in schools. And I do think, I mean, I've obviously sought the opinion of several equalities barristers about this as well. And their view is that the Eton headmaster's interpretation, or the legal interpretation he was provided with, is a very conservative, hyper-cautious interpretation. And if you look at the Equality Act, there are in the supplementary notes, there's something to the effect that it shouldn't be applied, it shouldn't restrict what's taught in the classroom. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission subsequently issued guidance in 2019 saying that they don't think it should be used, it shouldn't be invoked in that way either. But I do think that the Equality Act is poorly drafted and is sufficiently ambiguous on these critical points for it to be interpreted in this way. So I think what really needs to happen long term is the Equality Act needs to either be scrapped or amended. And one of the things the Free Speech Union intends to do when this is sort of blown over is to get an MP to propose something like a 2-line bill amending the Equality Act to make it absolutely clear that it can't be invoked and was never intended to be used to limit what's taught in the classroom. If some members of staff find the content of a lesson offensive, but nonetheless it's perfectly lawful in every other respect, then that wouldn't be a good reason for the school not to teach that particular subject or introduce children to those particular ideas. I mean, you can imagine, a teacher objecting to the teaching of To Kill a Mockingbird on the grounds that they find the kind of white savior motif offensive. Certainly, To Kill a Mockingbird has been widely kind of cancelled across the American public high school system for those reasons. It's considered now to be a problematic text. It's still, I think, pretty widely taught in the UK, and you can imagine if people trying to take advantage of the Equality Act to claim that it's offensive and shouldn't be taught. And I think we need to amend the Equality Act just to make it crystal clear that it cannot be used in that way.
Now, interesting thing to pursue there before we get into the curriculum content thing is about a teacher giving their own view across about something, especially if it's something controversial. And we have two speakers who sort of differed on their opinions on this, both of whom might be from a similar angle to yourself on things, and that's Calvin Robinson and Claire Fox. And Claire was saying that teachers should share their own viewpoints on things, and Calvin was sort of disagreeing with that, saying that actually it's a teacher should be more objective and step outside a bit from involving their own views and try and represent a range of views in what they teach. Where would you stand on that?
I'm with Claire Fox on that one, but with one proviso. I don't think there's anything wrong in teachers sharing a particular point of view or teaching a lesson from one particular perspective. I think it would be very difficult to ask them not to do that or to try and enforce compliance with such a policy. But the proviso is that the children shouldn't be introduced to just one perspective, one point of view, particularly on big controversial issues. They should be exposed to a range of views. So, some of our members have complained that in the wake of the BLM protests earlier this year, their children are being bombarded with BLM supporting messages which draw on critical race theory and portray Britain as being systemically racist and portray the police, the British police, as being institutionally racist and don't allow for any progress in race relations over the past 25 years. Britain is very much depicted as a kind of a place in which if you're not white, you very much are regarded as a second-class citizen and have far fewer opportunities than if you're white. I think it's perfectly fine for children to be exposed to that point of view, but they should also be exposed to an alternative point of view, which is actually we do have we've made a lot of progress. Britain may not be perfect. There may still be pockets of racism, but an enormous amount of progress has been made, particularly in the past 25 years by many anti-racist campaigners and equality campaigners like Trevor Phillips. Yeah, so I don't think there's anything wrong with children being exposed to controversial ideas, controversial perspectives on big hot button issues, but they shouldn't be just exposed to one point of view. I think the problem I have and lots of our members have is that schools are just teaching them one particular narrative on the theme of racism, and that is the BLM narrative. And that's a perfectly legitimate point of view, but it's not the only legitimate point of view. And I think children should be exposed to a range of views, particularly on that issue.
I mean, do you know that, or is that just a sense you're getting?
Well, do I know that children are, for the most
part, do you have figures on that? I mean, is there research in that, or is it just a sense of it?
No, it's just a sense. I mean, we've had. I'd say we've had about half a dozen complaints from members who are concerned that their children are essentially just being taught about this issue from a critical race theory perspective and not from any other perspective. But no, we haven't done a survey or anything like that. So it might be that those are exceptional, but I'd be surprised if they were exceptional. I expect that's what's happening in a lot of schools.
Now, who would have thought that Toby Young might be saying some controversial things?
Well, obviously you would expect that. Didn't seem, it was disappointingly lacking in controversy. I thought that we've spoken about the Nolan video before, and I think I was making the point that I thought it was a bit crap, and I certainly wouldn't have put it up on my personal YouTube channel. But I don't think there's anything particularly controversial in anything he said, was there?
Really? Okay. Well, let's the viewers sort of perhaps make some comments below if they want to take up anything he said. But certainly, if you want to look at the full video, the interview is out sometime during the week, and it's a long-ranging discussion. So subscribe to make sure you get the what's it called?
Yes, we hit a bit of a milestone in the week. We got 500 subscribers, so thank you very much to those of you that have been bothered to subscribe. It makes a difference to us, and hopefully more will. But we've got one final thing before we call it quits for this week, which is to give away 2 copies of Talking About Oracy. And Martin, in your magic hat, who have you got for us today?
Right, all 500 names here, and the first name, she's won before. I'm not going to let her win 2 weeks running. There we go. He's won as well.
Oh, Martin, please.
This happening all the time. I'll start again. I think I won just there as well. Is your name in the hat?
I hope not.
Are you one of the 500? Here we go. Chelsaz, if you email us on hello@wastingyourtime.co.uk, I think we'll flash up that email address as we go. There we are. We give us your details and tell us where to send it, and we'll send you a copy of Talking About Oracy. And one more, Martin. Matt Smedley. Matt,
email us and we will fire off a copy of that book to you. Thanks ever so much for watching and wasting even more of your precious lives on a Friday evening with Martin and me.
Take care.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time